everyone, I'm Mia McCormick and I am excited to introduce you to our woman of influence today. Vivienne Gucwa is relatively new to the photography spotlight, but in the past 7 years, she's amassed an online following of about 2 million people. She's also landed some large clientele, she's a Sony artisan, and she's become a well-known speaker in this industry. Vivienne, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I know you started, you got your big break with the photography blog, but why did you even pick up a camera in the first place?
I was really at an impasse in my life where I had been supporting myself for many years, working 7 days a week, 3 jobs at a time, and I just put myself back in school, and the stress of that kind of prompted me to walk around the city a lot. So I got the cheapest point and shoot that I could find. It arrived, broken, the white balance was completely broken, but I didn't return it, and I decided to just sort of use the camera as is and figure out a way to fix it. So eventually I cobbled up enough money together to actually upgrade to a real camera. And my first camera was the Sony A55. Took a lot of photos and tried to figure out what was going on with all the photos that I was taking.
And then at what point did you decide that those photos needed to go online?
So I got really into editing and I amassed this little collection of photos that I spent a lot of time working on. And eventually this is a repeated pattern in my life, asked my roommates again, what do I do with all these photos? And one of them said, I don't know, start a blog. So I literally Googled the word blog because I did not know what a blog was. And I made my first blog on Tumblr and just started putting my photos up on there.
Now, people start blogs every day, especially photographers. But yours, what happened when you put it up?
I actually didn't really have a concept that it had a social component to it at all. And Tumblr is it's kind of a hybrid between a blogging platform and a social network. So I started putting my work up, and within about 3 months, Tumblr had featured my work. So I amassed about 70,000 followers on Tumblr, and I had people sending me messages. And it had never occurred to me that I would love photography or that anything that I did with a camera would sort of reach people to that sort of extent.
That must have affected you so deeply to go from not having any kind of a platform in the space to suddenly having all of these people. Now, are they able to comment on your work and things like that?
So back then it was very difficult for people to actually do traditional type of commenting, but I did have an email address listed, and so people would send me messages. The New York Times reached out to me about working on doing a hyperlocal news blog with them about the East Village. It was kind of strange to have that happen alongside that kind of path that I was on, and made me realize I loved photography and, could I pursue this as a realistic career? Is this something I really wanted to do? So I had to kind of grapple with a lot of those questions really early on.
Did you have any intention when you went out to shoot? What were you trying to capture?
Something that I realized in sharing my work is that this was also a way for me to share my writing as well. So I've always written since I was little, but it always felt like an incomplete sort of art form for me in terms of creative writing. And I felt like with photography, I finally had the other piece of the puzzle. I think it's taken me a few years to figure out what it is that I was trying to capture, but I definitely have 2 themes that keep coming up. And there are 2 themes that I'm continuing to explore with my photography, and one of them is nostalgia. But it's definitely a nostalgia for, not necessarily for a thing that exists in reality. There's actually a German word, Sehnsucht, that describes this type of nostalgia for a place that you might not have ever been to, but which evokes a very visceral reaction within you. And I've also been exploring a lot of themes of isolation and how it feels to have grown up in a city that's full of people, but sometimes you feel like you're very anonymous and that you do exist in the city by yourself, especially if you're struggling with depression and/or anxiety, which I've struggled with both quite a bit. From a very early age, I've been very heavily influenced by cinema, so I kind of view my entire life as this never-ending sequence of scenes in a movie. And New York definitely is this, recurring character, and I think my photography is always looking to expose the different sides of personalities. So I started doing travel photography 2 years ago. It was a very random occurrence. I had always wanted to travel. I never had the means to travel because I never had the money to do that. And photography was this sort of door of opportunity that opened. Basically, the country of France reached out to me, which sounds ludicrous every time I say it. I received an email asking if I wanted to go photograph Paris on a commission shoot to photograph it in my own way. And it was back in 2014, and I think I nearly stroked out when I read the email. It was one of the most amazing moments, but that definitely was a turning point for me. So now I work with a lot of destinations, brands.
Were you influenced by any other artists?
So for me, I was very heavily influenced by a lot of classical artists and sort of how they were able to tell a story through music or through movement. It was very, very inspirational for me. But actually, I was also heavily influenced by painting growing up, so I'm very influenced by Impressionism. I'm very interested in the way that Impressionists would look at a scene in front of them, and rather than paint the reality of the scene, they would paint kind of their impression of it through the light and through the movement of water or movement of nature. So that's something that I've been very, very heavily influenced by.
Have you ever struggled with self-doubt in your work?
As an artist, you're always kind of second guessing, especially in this day and age, when you have social media and when you're putting your work out there and you have people giving you positive and negative feedback all the time, you're kind of in this weird position of either accepting everything that people say, which can be bad on either side, or is what I'm doing making a difference? How can I make a difference? Does this actually matter? Does anybody care for real? So I think those are all things I definitely deal with on a daily basis, for sure.
Any advice you could give to people who are struggling with it too?
For me, the biggest thing that I've had to learn, especially recently, is getting out of my own head and not overanalyzing every single situation. Just being able to get out of your comfort zone sometimes is the thing that can really, really help you with your art. Very recently, I went on an expedition to the Arctic, and it was with an astronaut. It was with Commander Hadfield. He chose a group of 10 artists to go with him on an icebreaker to the Canadian High Arctic for 18 days without internet or phone or anything. The entire mission of the expedition was to make art. Because it was so open-ended, there was a lot of self-doubt. I've kind of been governed by a lot of different fears in my life, like fear of heights, fear of small boats, and on this trip, I initially had to get over those immediately. I was kind of put in a position where I was on small boats every single day going through ice, and also on helicopters every single day. So it was a very big turning point for me in my career and in my life and in everything that I've dealt with.
Were you surprised by the response to your photographs when you put them up?
Yeah, very, very surprised. I think, being this sort of introvert, extrovert hybrid my whole life, it was very weird to sort of share something online and then get such an overwhelming response back. In a lot of ways, it was a little bit scary at first, and then it felt really exhilarating, to be honest, which is probably what made me decide to share my work on other social networks.
So that's kind of what pushed you to expand across other platforms?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to see how one photo can have such a different array of reactions or touch people in different ways or annoy people in different ways across platforms.
And then how did you build your following there? Is it just engagement? Are you just super engaged?
every time somebody would leave me a comment, I would comment back. So I would always take the time to respond to people, and I think that that initially is what sort of spurred on a lot of my following, was that I took a lot of time to actually respond to people.
A lot of people approach the social media part of it in a very business-like sense, but for you it sounds like it was more personal.
I think it's been very personal, but there is a business element to it. I mean, in the end, whatever you're sharing online, if you are an artist who's trying to build a career, people are going to view your work, and I think you always have to think of that to some respect.
Vivienne, I feel like we've learned through this interview that you have a very strong sense of voice. What kind of advice would you give to younger artists that are looking to find theirs?
You know, I thought to myself, and I still think to myself to this day, if I can shoot a subject that has been shot a billion times in all different angles, and I can find a way to make it my own, then I might be onto something when it comes to my art. And I think my biggest piece of advice would be to follow that. So whether you're shooting portraits, or you're shooting food, or you're shooting travel, or you're shooting, I don't know, whatever it is that you're shooting, basically never think to yourself, oh, this has been done before, so I have nothing new that I can contribute to it. If it's something especially that has been done before many times, that's all the more reason to try to figure out if you can make it different. And when you can make it different, then you know that you've found a style, and whether or not that's the style you end up with, you know, I don't know, but that's the beauty of art.